Well, speaking of leadership ballots, Anthony Albanese and Julia Gillard were there campaigning in Boothby. They seem to have settled their differences, Christopher. But I do want to get your thoughts on a few things. First of all, in Boothby, you've got a situation on your hands there. It's a seat that's been held by the Liberal Party since 1949. These are the days when the Communist Party was still in action, now in danger of turning red. What's happened, first of all, in Boothby before I ask you about Sturt?
Well, there's a couple of things that have happened in Boothby. One is that the boundaries have shifted remarkably over the years. So it now heads deep south in the metropolitan area of Adelaide. There's quite a lot of Labor voting territory down there. And some of the very strong Liberal areas that used to be in Boothby are now in Adelaide or in Sturt. So that's made it a harder seat to win. And I think that the infrastructure in Boothby, the Liberal Party infrastructure in Boothby, hasn't been as strong in recent times as it used to be 20, 25 years ago, which I think is the same for political parties across the spectrum. And I think it's going to be a difficult seat to win. Rachel Swift, our Liberal candidate, is an outstanding candidate, and if she doesn't win, it'll be a real loss to the House of Representatives. John Howard was campaigning with Rachel, said she was the best candidate that he'd campaigned within the election and had the highest recognition rate, so that'll be a real pity. But, you know, South Australia's going through a bit of a red phase. We've just had a big victory for Labor here in South Australia at the state election. Yeah. But I haven't given up hope in Boothby. Labor always thinks they're going to win Boothby, but the margin's 1.3%. It's very low. If there's a 4 or 5% swing to Labor, it's very hard to see how it'll be held.
OK, and on to Sturt. I mean, this is the seat that you held, was a Liberal bastion for so long, and it's in danger of turning red as well. What are you hearing on the ground there? And, you know, maybe Sturt needs you back.
Oh, well, Pete, I wish I had $1 for everybody who's asked me to return to politics. I had no idea how popular I was until I left, and it was all too late to go back.
Yeah, come on, you knew how popular you were.
When there's a republic, I'll run for president and give everybody the chance to vote for me then.
Oh, good Lord.
Look, I think Sturt will be all right. I almost lost the seat in 2007, and it's kind of similar circumstances today. In 2007, the Howard government was coming to an end after 11 and a half years. We got down to 0.9% in Sturt. It was a bit of a nail-biter. We clung on. And I think that James Stephens, who's the Liberal member for Sturt and my successor and a very good candidate and a good member, I think he'll win, but I don't think it'll be an easy victory. But it's going to be one of those days, I think, for the Liberal Party. I think we'll win some new seats. I think we'll lose a few seats. And I think Labor will probably form a government. But you never want to say never when Scott Morrison's involved. And with a lot of postal votes to be counted, I don't think necessarily we'll know every seat tonight. And I think Sturt might be in that category. But I think we'll win in the end.
Christopher, I wanted to get your thoughts too as former Defence Minister. We saw a pretty extraordinary leak yesterday of this document from Marise Payne asking for $2.8 billion extra funding for the Solomon Islands. There's a lot of concern around this security deal that they've done with China. I mean, you would have had so much oversight of this as the former Defence Minister, and we all know how much money disappears in that region of the world. Do you think it would have made a difference?
Well, look, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and at the time, if that's a true story, if the government was considering that kind of money, well, $2.8 billion is an astronomical amount of money. Let's not forget that Australia already provides 50% of all of the foreign aid in the world that goes into the South Pacific. We're certainly pulling our weight. We're the only country with a High Commission or an embassy in every South Pacific capital. The idea that we've taken our eye off the South Pacific is blatant nonsense. And I was there when we did the Pacific Step Up. I was the minister responsible for the Pacific Step Up. That was $1.4 billion in 2018-19. So if Marise Payne asked for $2.8 billion, that is a lot of money. Hindsight, with people looking back saying, oh, that would have made the difference. The Chinese have been working tirelessly to get a foothold in the South Pacific. It's like playing whack-a-mole in the South Pacific with so many different countries and so many different interests. And we just have to keep doing it. And it's never going to end. And I'm sure that we'll work out the Solomon Islands situation over time after this election. It was probably difficult during the election being in caretaker mode. But I also don't believe, by the way, that leak came from the National Security Committee of the Cabinet. That would have been known. If that's a true story, it would have been talked about across Canberra, from Department of Foreign Affairs to Defence to Home Affairs to Prime Minister and Cabinet. Goodness knows who was chatting over a beer at the Realm Hotel or wherever it might be and dropped that to a journalist. Certainly didn't have to come from the NSC.
No, and the timing was quite peculiar. But the other thing, I mean, when you say playing whack-a-mole with China, they are the master bribers. They call it whatever you want, Belt and Road, but they drop a lot of cash. And these are obviously very corrupt countries. At the end of the day, I know this hasn't been said in a lot of the dialogue, but you would have seen this about how much corruption goes on in that part of the world and how much money disappears.
Well, corruption is a problem endemic across the entire world. I think the Australian polity and our economy and our whole institutionalised system of how we manage our country, we're the luckiest people in the world because corruption is almost non-existent. I mean, there must be some corruption somewhere in Australia, but it's almost non-existent in comparison to other countries in the world. And so there'll definitely be corruption in parts of the South Pacific as well. But I wouldn't necessarily, make the generalisation that the whole of the South Pacific is corrupt. China's working very hard in the South Pacific. They use different means to do so. Australia doesn't necessarily adopt the same means, and that sometimes makes it harder for us.
Hey, just a final one here, Krista. If the Liberal Party lose, who would you like to see as the Liberal leader?
Well, look, it all depends who wins, doesn't it? So we'll know over the next few days.
If Scott Morrison loses tonight, would you like to see Josh Frydenberg or Peter Dutton lead the party?
Well, I'm not getting into that kind of speculation because we don't know which members are going to win their seats. So we'll have to wait to see. They'll probably want me to saddle up again.
Would you? If we don't become a republic?
No.
Did you head?
No. I told you, the next campaign I'm running for is when we're a republic.
Okay.
That's a long way off.
Okay, there we go. Christopher Pyne.
I'll be old and grey. Grey hair.
Always good to chat to you, Christopher. We'll talk to you soon.